going.
So now we get to the subject matter. What we are attempting to do is learn how to love. So every aspect of our life, we are going. Are we loving today? You know, am I able to stop and not react and focus on, oh, is this saying that coming forth from my mouth, is this in love or I'm in the flesh? Am I seeking out all these things of wealth for my vested self-interest, or am I doing it out of love? Am I respecting authority because I don't want to suffer the consequences, or am I respecting authority because of love? So the aspects and the difference between flesh being ruled like a beast, a behemoth, or being ruled in the law of liberty, which when we walk in love, there's a tremendous amount of liberty. So as we go forward and we're trying to find and define love through the revelation, which he promises to teach us, which is in 1 Thessalonians 4:9, it says, "For God teaches us to love our brother." And so it's not that we can teach each other how to love one another. We can hold each other accountable, but we can't necessarily teach how the true essence of or power of love is. So the goal is bringing about the connection, and from that connection drawing the spiritual drink, and then from that divine nature and divine power, that spiritual drink, which they call it divinity, or theos in Greek, is that right? And then gaphrith in Hebrew, which in essence is the sap of a tree. So all the references of being planted in the courtyard of our Elohim, our God, is in reference to roots going down to something. So the first part of progressing into understanding what love is and that connection that we go through is we go to the mysteries, which literally means to initiate and discipline. So it's the same as Hanak or Kanak. So when you look at the literal definitions of these words and understand how when we're going forward and coming to authority, if we come to that authority in the flesh, there's this creature that's there specifically because the law states no flesh shall exalt itself. The law, and this is probably important, I need to insert this here. It says in the New Testament, in Brit Hadashah, the law is spiritual. Law defines boundaries. When we're in the Spirit, we understand that we can't do this and we can do this. The law of liberty in the Spirit gives us a tremendous amount of leeway to where we can go. When we're in the flesh, everything's constricted to where what we can do or can't do. So understanding the simplicity of spirituality, which is law, unseen boundaries that aren't written down or set up. When we see this clearly, it's like, well, spirituality is law. It's boundaries, staying within the boundaries, and that's what the Ruach, the Spirit, does, is it keeps us within what is reasonable and what is expected of us, dependent upon, and it changes through our maturity process. So, as we go forward and we look through Scripture, there's the rock of our salvation. Psalm 95:1, the rock of our salvation. When we go all the way back to Deuteronomy 32, you find out the purpose of the rock, when you've established the connection, is in Deuteronomy 30, the whole song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32:4, 15, and 18, defines and gives us an explanation of the purpose of the rock. Because it says in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, it says he does not change. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. So 1 Corinthians 10:4 plainly states that the rock that followed them during the time of the Exodus was Christ, Mashiach. And out of that rock comes living water. So when we understand that the Scripture says to be grounded, rooted in love, we see very plainly that roots into a rock cannot be separated. So when you go to Romans chapter 8, you start in verse 33 to 39, it tells you, he gives that testimony that there's nothing that can separate us from that love. So what we're seeking, what we're trying to understand, and what we're learning from him is growing those roots into the rock, because that's the source of the divine nature and divine power planted in the house of Jehovah, which causes our life, our health, our understanding, and the doctrine as we go forward. So when you go to Deuteronomy 32, we see that in Hebrew it's Hatzil Tamim La'alov Ki Kal Dorachav Mishpat El Amunah Ve'en Avel Tzadik Ve'yashar Hu, which is the rock, definite article, is complete, not perfect, it's complete. It's different. Complete is having all its parts, and perfect is, you know, something different. Paul is, it's like performance or deed. When you look it up in the lexicons and use the biblical principles of the mouth, two, three witnesses, it's different than another word that they use for work, but they translate work. And it's actually the designator of all the grammatical terms in Hebrew. So Paul means literally to perform. So his performance upon our standing upon the rock is consistent. When we understand that he does not change, and we understand the consistency which Scripture defines, and right here it says that all his ways, as the rock actually means mode of operation, all his ways are judgment. And this type of judgment in Hebrew, mishpat, is if-then judgment. So if there is a car speeding directly at you, the judgment obviously is get out of the way. You know, it's very simple. There's nothing complicated about this form of judgment. If a man commits adultery, the judgment for that is death. You know, if a man commits sleeps with another man like he would with a woman, the result is death. Stoning, and then all the variations of sexual immorality. So, and that is mishpat, if then. So, as we speak to our children, as we speak to our parents, there's judgment upon what's said. And there's a qualification in the New Testament, B'rah Shah, that says very plainly that as you judge, you shall be judged. And the other contrast to that is, in the last day, my words will judge you. So you can't just have no judgment. There is judgment. It's the word. There it is. You know, but if you add to or diminish from, you know, there's consequences to that also. So when we focus on this subject of where we stand, the rock, we start looking throughout the Scripture and we find out that the time of trouble in Psalm 27:5 is where he places us. So when you're aware of this, of the pressing, the trouble, the consequences of conflict, that when we cry out to him, it's because we're not on the rock. So he puts us over on the rock. That doesn't mean that we stay there, because in order to stay there we have to have roots. And this is the subject matter of what we're talking about, love. Be grounded, rooted in love, Ephesians 3:17. So the process is what we're seeking out. And the process of grounded, rooted in love is that rock, which is Christ. And so when you're conscious of this, when you perceive the rock, you know, the stable foundation, then we start seeing the source of our salvation and the focal point of where we stand. So all this is because there's many scriptures that have to do with the rock. We start seeking these things out, like in Isaiah 28:16, where the rock is also a source of peace and of stumbling. So not all the times are we being attacked by an adversary. Sometimes we're just being disobedient and we stumble at the rock. And I can personally tell you in my walk when I was a baby that sometimes Mashiach, Christ, did things, and I thought Satan was against me. And then sometimes Satan was giving me the things I wanted because I wouldn't listen to him. So he's like, okay, you're going to suffer the consequences. So all of a sudden, the adversary comes along and gives me the things I want because it's all flesh, and I'm going to suffer the consequences because that's what I want. I didn't want. I was suffering from the disease of I ain't trying to hear it. So he gives me what I want, and then I suffer the consequences. So when I went through the maturity process, I realized, wow, I was a baby. And a baby doesn't receive the same consequences as a child does. As we all know, a baby can poop and pee and puke on himself, and it's okay. There's a little discomfort with the parent, but it's cleaned up and move on. But when a child does that, there's consequences and sternings. So we have to be aware of whoever we're dealing with, of their maturity process, and so becoming conscious of the source of our salvation very plainly says the rock of our salvation. So that part where I was defining the contrast between what literal salvation is and the tools has to do with when you come into authority. So, and in contrast with that is we don't know anything until it's revealed to us. So we also need to be aware that the rock is a rock of stumbling. And personally, when I've developed my own personal definitions of things, it was my source of stumbling. Instead of patiently waiting for the true definition, I concluded wrongly, hastily, because I was off the rock, of a false definition, which causes stumbling. So, and sometimes there was no adversary involved. It was just me doing me. Okay, so